So good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of MOS, I welcome you all for this session on cataract and IOL. This is a post-lunch session, but very interesting talks by Dr. Rajesh Joshi, Dr. Bhavikar sir, and others. So without wasting time, let's start with Dr. Rajesh Joshi. And Dr. Rajesh Joshi is to give a talk on surgical pearls in subluxated cataracts. Dr. Rajesh, over to you.
Thank you so much. I thank MOS for giving me this opportunity. Nothing to disclose. Now, before we go on to see the surgical pulse, let us see what are the indications for surgical procedure. If the cataractous lens is subluxated, obviously it has to be removed. Anisometropia or unstable refractive error due to changing refraction. Impending dislocation of the lens, large zonular dialysis is there, and it's going to dislocate either in the vitreous cavity or in the anterior chamber. If the subluxated lens is causing glaucoma and the lens in the anterior chamber. There are various capsular fixation devices which are available. And we have to decide that on the table, depending upon, or on the slit lamp examination, depending upon the amount of clock hour of dislocation. If it is less than 4 o'clock hour dislocation, usually capsular tension ring is sufficient to stabilize the zonules. Or you can put capsular tension segment as an additional support to the zonules. If it is more than 4 o'clock, modified capsular tension ring, that is Sionis ring, or combination of CTR and CTS is also sufficient. Now, pearl number 1, incision. Incision should be away from the zonular dehiscence area. Because if it is in the zonular dehiscence area, there are likely to be a problems because fluid may go inside or viscoelastic may go in the vitreous cavity, and at the outset we don't want such thing to happen before we go on to the main surgical procedure. Staining with tryptophan blue always comes handy because in white cataract you need to see the anterior capsular margin, as well as performing phacoemulsification becomes easy if the anterior capsular margin is easily seen. Apart from that, you can put the capsular tension ring inside the black. Pearl number 2, plug the area with high molecular weight viscoelastic. Suppose you have around 5 to 6 o'clock hours of subluxation. You have to plug this area because if you don't plug it, there are likely chances of vitreous coming out through that area. The better idea will be staining with tricord so that if some vitreous is there, you can always clear that before you plug that area. Pearl number 3 is CCC, creation of anterior capsule opening with the help of 26 gauge needle and rotating it either with the forceps or with whatever instruments you are comfortable with, and make sure that there is a sufficient area, or you have to create a small rhexis margin near the subluxated part of the lens. Slightly eccentric area, CCC is always better. Identification of zonal weakness, usually seen while performing the CCC. You can see here the lens is getting wobbled up, and apart from that, there are a few folds on the anterior capsule. Movement of the lens, extravasation of dye from the zonules, that is also an indication of some zonal weakness, and difficulty in nucleus rotation. Hydro procedure, hydro dissection has to be gentle, and you should not rotate the nucleus too much because rotation can increase the zonular dehiscence. You can see the extravasation of the dye from the area, and this is likely to be going to be difficult while you perform chopping of the nucleus. So always keep capsular tension ring ready in such situation. Pearl number 5, timing of PCR or endocapsular ring is debatable. You can do it after performing capsulorhexis, that is before nucleus management, or after nucleus and cortex removal. But there are pros and cons of both the procedures. These are the capsular fixation devices which are available, and usually you can choose depending upon the axial length. If the axial length is less than 24 millimeter, you can choose the size of CTR between 10 to 12 millimeter. If it is on the larger side, you have to err on the larger size of CTR. Placement of endocapsular ring before nucleus management. Now, as you can see, the nucleus is coming into the port. Of course, it is not well centered. And there was already subluxated nucleus. So I thought I will go for nucleus removal. But later on, I realized that if I go further, whole bag may come into the phaco probe. So I decided to put an endocapsular ring. Now here comes the importance of staining of anterior capsule. You can see the stained area of anterior capsule, and so that you can place the endocapsular ring properly inside the bag. There are certain advantages of placement of endocapsular ring before nucleus management makes surgery safe. Ring provides equatorial support to the bag, prevents zonal stress. Disadvantages are cortex aspiration becomes difficult and insertion may increase the zonal weakness. So dictum is don't delay too much. This is again another video of endocapsular ring placement. Always push viscoelastic beneath the anterior capsule to create a gap for the placement of endocapsular ring. Helps in the prevention of entrapment of the cortex. So if you have zonal adhesions, always place viscoelastic beneath the anterior capsule and then go for placement of endocapsular ring. The guiding of endocapsular ring with the help of dialer, which is placed through the side port so as to guide the endocapsular ring inside the bag. You can see here, I have placed dialer at the shaft of endocapsular ring and guiding the ring inside the bag. After the nucleus removal, it becomes easy because there is no cortex. So you have a bag and you can place the endocapsular ring as we have just discussed. So guiding becomes very difficult, very easy when you have no cortex inside. Nucleus management, I prefer to chop. So I will not go into details of this because this management of the nucleus depends upon whatever you are following in your routine surgeries. I usually perform chop technique and chop the nucleus. So whatever technique with whatever you are comfortable with, you can go with that technique only. Cortex aspiration, bimanual irrigation and aspiration versus coaxial. Tangential stripping of the cortex instead of radial one. So instead of going for radial removal of the cortex, you should tangentially sweep the aspiration probe and then remove the cortex. If subluxation is more than 4 o'clock hour, it is always better to insert the Sionis ring so as to have more support to the bag. And if the nucleus is soft, you can always aspirate with the help of Simcoe's cannula or whatever way you are comfortable with. So take home message is choose endocapsular ring, CTR, CTS segment depending on clock rules of subluxation. Incision away from the zonal area. Use high molecular weight viscoelastic to plug that area and guide CTR in the back properly. Don't delay too much while implanting endocapsular ring. Prefer whatever technique of phacoemulsification you are choosing, and proper eye cortex is important. So that is all from my side. Thanks for your patience listening.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Rajesh, for excellent talk. I have one query for you. Which
Yes.
is the most challenging step you find in subluxated cataract?
Yeah, in fact,
comment by.
if you have a large amount of subluxation, particularly with subluxated traumatic cataract, capsulorhexis becomes a very difficult step, because you have to center it properly and you have to have a good area between the edge of the nucleus and the capsulorhexis margin so as to manage the placement of endocapsular ring or capsular tension segment.
Quick comment by Dr. Vavikar, sir.
Yes, I agree with Dr. Rajesh. Very good presentation. See, during capsulorhexis, we have to ensure that in the end, when the CTR is placed, the capsulorhexis should be centric. Therefore, you have to take it slightly eccentric on the subluxated cataract. And second thing is he explained very well that you should delay the putting of the CTR as late as you can, but put it when it is really necessary, when it is must.
Yes.
Okay. And do you feel that femto-assisted laser cataract helps in subluxated cataracts?
Femto-assisted cataract definitely helps in subluxated, but it also depends on the amount of subluxation. See, as we already decided that CCC is the most difficult step, and CCC is performed very well by femto cataract. Okay, so if you have a intumescent cataract and subluxation, then femto maybe is a little tough. But if it is a normal subluxate, like the cataract is almost in the center, femto will be definitely more helpful.
Thank you. So now second talk is by you only on VVT, the new kid on the block. Over to you, sir.
So thank you, Moscon, for giving me this opportunity of talking about this new lens VVT. I'm a consultant to Alcon. Now, if we see the reasons why surgeons do not want to put multifocal IOL, the most important reasons, two important reasons are the visual disturbances, especially at night, and poor distance vision. And we have developed many tools now to predict how much the person will have those disturbances like angle alpha and corneal aberration. But still, you get once in a while, you get a patient who's kind of a bouncer or a surprise. So what if you have a lens with a continuous extended focal range and like a monofocal visual disturbance profile for distance? So it is the new lens called VVT with an X-wave technology. If you see macroscopically, both lenses appear to be same, but if you see the inner part, central part, you can see that in the center there is a annulus. So there is a smooth plateau which is about 1 micron high, which stretches the wavefront, creating a continuous extended focal range. And it is of 2.2 millimeter diameter outside, and it shifts the wavefront to utilize all the available energy. Now let us look at this video. I'm sorry. Let us listen to this video.
Welcome to this video on the mechanism of action of the Acrosoft IQ Vivity IOL. The Acrosoft IQ Vivity IOL is a first of its kind, non-diffractive presbyopia correcting IOL that utilizes X-wave technology to stretch and shift the wavefront. Acrosoft Vivity IOL utilizes essentially all light energy, giving patients an extended focal range with a monofocal visual disturbance profile. The Acrosoft Vivity IOL's X-wave technology consists of two smooth surface transition elements in the central 2.2 millimeters of the IOL. The first surface transition element is a slightly elevated smooth plateau that is about 1 micron in height, and the second surface transition element is a slight curvature change. With presbyopia, the focused light falls behind rather than on the retina when looking at close and intermediate objects. The slightly elevated smooth plateau is responsible for stretching the focal range. The small curvature change is responsible for shifting the continuous extended focal range to the anterior side of the retina so that a full range of vision is provided to the patient. The two smooth surface transition elements work simultaneously to stretch and shift the wavefront, creating an extended focal range, providing 20/20 at far, greater than 20/25 at intermediate, and 20/32 at close distances.
So that is how it works, that it stretches and shifts the wavefront, but it never splits the energy, that is the light coming from the distance, unlike our other diffractive lenses. That is why, you know, the patient satisfaction is better. Now, if you see the last part over here, the focus is continuous. I'm sorry. You see this, it has got a continuous focus right from distance to near, except near very far, very small vision print, there is a problem. So what is the clinical outcomes? There were two studies performed and it was compared with IQ. If you see for distance, it is comparable to IQ. For intermediate visual acuity, that is 66 centimeters, or computer distance, the visual acuity is excellent, 20-25, and for near also till in J8 chart, the visual acuity is good. But for N6 or J6, a patient requires a addition of +1. Then it works very well at all the pupillary distances. This is for distance, intermediate, and near visual acuity. Then you can see the profile of the lens over here. It is hardly causing any photic phenomena at night, so patient does not have that apprehension. Then the number of patients who are not bothered by the photic phenomena are comparable to what we get with a monofocal lens like IQ. Similarly, you see the last column here, significantly more VVT recipients reported not being bothered by blurred vision. So how do you do workup for this patient? We do everything what we do for a trifocal IOL, that is angle alpha and kappa, macular OCT, topography, tomography, dry eye status, and corneal higher aberrations. And while doing the counseling, we give two clear-cut options. Number one, either you can have no glasses with halos, with which the patient gets adjusted eventually, or no halos, but glasses only for the last smallest print. Okay, option makes the patient accept both the lenses better, and they are ready in their mind from the beginning what to expect. What has been my experience, personal experience? So I've done 27 eyes up till now. Patients who have got visual acuity of 6.6 or better, 26, and near vision 27 in 8. Okay, and N6 or better 21. So out of 27 patients, in 21 patients, the near vision was N6, and in some patients the near vision was N8. And patients who had a refractive, post-refractive element of 0.5 or within 0.5 were 26 out of 27, and highly satisfied patients, all 27 out of 27. Now here are two examples. 27-year-old male lady coming with a unilateral cataract. We tried to search for the cause of the cataract as the age is somewhat atypical. Patient had a visual acuity of 618 and N36, and the other lens was absolutely clear. And this is how we do the workup of the patient, and we decided to go ahead with a VVT toric IOL with a 22 and 1.5 diopter cylinder at placement at 104 degrees. Post-operatively, she was 6.6 and N8. Mind you, she has a thin primary PCO. In spite of that, the vision is 6.6 and N8. And patient is still quite happy because with +1, she is able to read even the smallest print. Of course, after the YAG capsulotomy, maybe her vision will improve, but as of now, it is 8. Then another case, 48-year-old female, both as PSC, with the angle alpha was very atypical, that is 0.7, okay, which is, you don't get such a high angle alpha. We validated the result and went ahead with the plain toric IOL, and the patient we extremely satisfied, uncorrected visual acuity of 6/4 and N5. What we have seen in younger patients, the results are even better. And we have been asking questions to our patients. Patients are very, very happy with the distance vision. For as far as the TV, the lower ticker tape is concerned, some of them say that they can read, some of them they can't read. But when it comes to intermediate vision, patients are extremely satisfied, and near vision, Some patients are bothered by that +1 add which required, but some patients are not. So in a nutshell, VVT is truly a unique IOL, provides continuous extended focal range from distance to intermediate to functional near vision. It has got a monofocal-like visual disturbance profile as it is a non-diffractive IOL, and it is a binocular myopic contrast sensitivity is not it's not significantly different than the accuracy of IQ. Because of that low light condition, also people are able to read properly. So, and similar pre-op and post-op care of your routine patients is required, nothing addition. In fact, the chair time is bound to go down as compared to what we have for multifocal and trifocal IOLs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vavekar, for an excellent talk. Few questions actually. How do we compare VVT with IHANS?
Yeah, very good question. See, VVT, everybody will get in it. Okay, but IHANS, it is unpredictable. I think that is the most key factor. If you see, the VVT is classified as a presbyopia correcting lens because the ad is more than 1.5, whereas IHANS is classified as a monofocal lens because it has got a ad of probably +1 or 1.25, and for a lens to be classified as a multifocal or trifocal or EDOF, it requires minimum 1.5 diopters add. Now what happens that IHANS has to depend on the higher aberrations of the patient, and some people may have that, some people may not have. So it may not work always. Whereas VVT, whatever it is going to work. Unless of course macula is a problem, but that is something which is beyond our control.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Anybody has any other questions for Dr. Vavekar? Dr. Suvira, do you want to add anything on this? Please unmute yourself. Please unmute, yeah. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah. Would you like to add anything or ask question to Dr. Vavekar on VVT IOL?
I have a little limited experience. I have a lot of experience with IHANS, and I did a thumbs up when Dr. Vavekar said what he did, because for all that IHANS claims, and I'm very fond and happy using the Technis multifocal lenses with the IHANS, and we go as close to plotting deep focus curves in all our patients. We find that in many of them, we do not get the intermediate range of vision. Whether we mix, we match, we leave the patient 0.5 myopic, I just don't get any close to wow effect for even intermediate work. See, the point is if he cannot do things at a range of 40, 45, it's not worked. So I also find with the IHANS, it doesn't work. So I stick to either a multifocal and vary my ads, or I stick to a Zeiss trifocal is the other one I do use. So EDOF is questionable where IHANS is concerned in my hands too. Thank you.
One more question which I would like to ask Dr. Vavekar and Dr. Suvira is that regarding surgically induced astigmatism, if you get an astigmatism of against the rule astigmatism, say 0.75 or 1, even a monofocal IOL, if you have implanted, patient does get 6, 9 and N8 vision unaided if you have put monofocal in both the eyes. So is there a real need for these all? Of course, there is a, what is your take on that?
Good afternoon. You want to answer this?
You can answer it first. No problem.
Yeah, thank. So first is answer and then is a question. Santosh,
Connect through speaker.
if a patient has got astigmatism of 5,
even delivering my talk.
whenever we are somebody has got to work with computer 3D, we prescribe that cylinder, right? So after cataract surgery, why we are ignoring that cylinder and hoping that patient will be 6, 9 and N8? On the contrary, we should give the patient maximum chance of best correction, best vision, and then leave it to the patient. So I think whatever patient should be 6, 6 and N6, at least. Not always possible, but we should try to maximize the patient vision with or without glasses, and therefore I do not like to leave behind any residual cylinder. I will go only by what Barrett calculator will say. If it tells me put a toric IOL, I'll go for toric IOL. If the patient says, Barrett says no toric IOL, I'll not go for toric. If the cylinder is less, that Barrett toric is not recommended, but it is still high, I will go for LRI. And then second question to Dr. Suvira, you can answer both the questions simultaneously. Have you tried VVT?
No, I haven't.
Okay, fine.
I haven't. That's why I couldn't answer I don't have experience with VVT.
Yeah, I think
I've tried the Appasamy in focus. I've tried the iHance. I've tried the Symphony. But with the iHance, it's very, very questionable the results we get. I agree with you. Yes. Any other question for me?
Oh, yeah, the first question he had asked to both of us.
Yeah. So I mean,
real life scenario, I'm saying.
Yes. I feel that the end result is what the patient sees. How you achieve it, Santosh, if you're leaving behind a bit of a cylinder and they are getting that depth and they are able to put their key through the door, see their food, sign their checks, I think it's brilliant. I also feel that even with toric IOLs, I cannot guarantee that I'll get rid of the cylinder. Especially if they're smaller cylinders, I often find a small cylinder still left behind.
Yes.
So justification of a bang on getting an end result each time doesn't happen. So if in your experience, I mean, I have friends who are very happy leaving the patients playing around with their cylinders and all, and the patients are happy. So I feel then that also is a decent consideration, because I don't think that either a multifocal or a toric is foolproof, because there's so many other variables which are responsible for the end result, from the patient's biomechanics, healing, how your incision went, was it long, short, was it in the right place, has the lens moved? So there are so many other variables. If this works, then I don't think the end result is patient vision and satisfaction.
Perfect. And long-term stability also is important.
True.
True,
very true.
lenses, long-term stability. So real life scenario for everybody, I said, for
Yes.
comprehensive ophthalmologist is
Yes.
give good vision, and spectacle dependence has to be reduced. Instead of saying spectacle freedom, we can say less dependence on spectacle. Anyway.
I tell my multifocal patients that you will definitely need glasses for some activities.
Yes.
Either it's looking at the red running screen on a television or looking at very small print, or that way I'm not being safe, I'm actually being honest.
Yes,
You know, because
absolutely.
it can happen, right? Dr.
Yes.
Bhavik? It can happen
Yes.
sometimes. And then they hold you at, you
Yes.
said. So I think, yeah,
Under promise and over perform. That's how it should be.
100%.
Anything to add, Dr. Vavikar, sir?
No, I fully agree.
Okay, yeah. Fine. So now we go ahead with the next talk by Dr. Suvira Jain. It's a very interesting talk. And Dr. Suvira, madam, please start sharing your screen. Good afternoon, Dr. Satyajit Sinha, for joining. Welcome you for this MOS session on cataract and IOL. After Dr. Suvira, you will talk.
Thank you.
Welcome, Dr. Satyajit Sinha.
Thank you so much.
So today we need not just regret and think about how bad our toric IOL, our patients with any patients with a residual astigmatism do not have to be just, compromised in any way today, because we have at our disposal technology and technique that now make it possible to achieve much better post-operative outcomes. It's worth remembering that at least 30%, if not more, patients have a preoperative corneal astigmatism of equal to or more than 1 diopter. Moreover, if you were to take Baylor's nomogram into consideration, which factors in the posterior corneal toricity, patients with as little as 0.5 diopters against the rule would also be suitable candidates for toric IOLs. In this talk now, I'd like to share with you the finer points that would improve and aid in your achieving higher accuracy and predictability in your toric IOL implantations. Let's start with the data acquisition. The first variable that we look at is the keratometry. Now, the keratometry in its essential form consists of two things. You have your magnitude, which is the quantum measured in diopters, and you have the direction, which is the vector or the meridian or the axis. Now, an accurate assessment of the magnitude and vector both is absolutely essential so that you can then correct it properly. Now, the best way to figure out what is the magnitude or the quantum of the astigmatism is by performing a manual keratometry, which is well calibrated, or with the use of the case that you get on an optical biometer. Corneal topography is probably the best way to figure out what is your axis because it gives a graphic representation of the axis. For example, if you see this patient on an axial curvature map, you've got an against the rule astigmatism, but the EKR map shows a nice tall peak, indicating that this is a good candidate for a toric IOL. So also this patient with the rule astigmatism, you can see the EKR map here shows you a nice tall peak, again signifying that this too is a good patient for a toric IOL. Now, moreover, corneal topography is a test that should be done preoperatively in all patients being considered for toric IOL implantation, and the most important reason being to rule out non-orthogonal or irregular astigmatism. And why is that important? Is that because if the patient has some amount of irregular astigmatism, he's going to likely to have a suboptimal end result. But even with patients with irregular astigmatism, there are some variations. So this patient has got a fairly irregular astigmatism, but when you look at the EKR 65 mean map, they always say that in the 4.5 millimeter zone, which is the zone under scotopic conditions, the maximum dilatation of an average person, the variation should not be more than 1 diopter in magnitude and 10 degrees, and it is not there. So you've got a patient with an irregular astigmatism, but the EKR mean at 65 shows very little variability. And even though there are 3 little peaks, you can actually see a tall peak. When you see a tall peak, even in a patient with an irregular astigmatism, it signifies an axis on which the dioptric power can act. So this patient too would be a suitable candidate for a toric IOL. But this patient with an irregular astigmatism and a flat plateau with a significant variability in the EKR 65 would definitely be a contraindication. So the important point here is to do a corneal topography in all these cases. Now we measure the corneal case with different instruments. All instruments are good, but all measure differently. So it's unlikely that you're going to get, perfectly identical results. Now, even if you don't get identical results, but there is something, the results between both of them are close, they can be considered as accurate. So what Warren Hill said is measurements should be taken on 3 different machines and the measurements measured. If there is concordance between them, you take it as accurate and use them. If not, repeat the test and the 2 closest measurements are then taken. Now, till now, we have addressed measurement of the case, the anterior corneal keratometric values. But we cannot discount the importance of the posterior corneal toricity. The posterior corneal toricity is measured by the Baylor's nomogram or the Barrett toric calculator. The Baylor's nomogram has worked it out that every normal patient has a posterior corneal toricity, which is against the rule astigmatism of -0.3. If this were the case, and it is, then any patient who has a with the rule astigmatism, he is likely to be left overcorrected. Similarly, a patient with an against the rule astigmatism is likely to be left undercorrected. And so therefore, what you could do is when you are planning, when you are planning a patient for a toric correction, what will be your minimum correction? You can up the threshold for patients with the rule astigmatism to about 1.5 diopters and drop it to about 0.75 diopters for against rule astigmatism. Another important point is when we are planning the IOL power, it's worth leaving the patient plus 0.3 with the rule. The reason for this is there is always a tendency to and against the rule drift with time. So you could take this into consideration before planning your IOL. And the other way in which we can work out the posterior corneal toricity is with the help of a Barrett toric calculator, which only predicts the posterior case and incorporates into its IOL power. The telecentric measurement of the anterior corneas along with the swept source OCT of the IOL Master 700 assumes that it actually truly measures the entire cornea. But what it measures is the anterior cornea, the thickness of the cornea, the posterior cornea, and therefore they call it the total keratometric value. Apparently, it has a very high level of repeatability and can also be used with normal standard A constants. And if you were to move to the IOL Master 700, you now use we don't use the typical Barrett Universal 2, but we use the TK Universal 2 and the TK Toric formula. Finally, coming to the IOL power, and these are very important, figuring out what are the right variables, figuring out that you do not have any data entry errors, which means you're getting your data in a predictable way, is a very important thing. Now, IOL power calculation to me for any premium IOL should ideally be done on an optical biometer. However, there are some who have been using ultrasound biometry, and I'm very sure of the results, and I'm sure they can continue too. Next comes which calculator you use. We swear by the Barrett, but even if you go with the company calculator, you should be okay. Now, the Barrett calculator is a free online calculator. You put in your anterior keratometric values, it predicts the posterior keratometric values, it requires 5 variables to be set in. Now, this is important. It works out the spherical. You don't have to put in your spherical there. It tells you which lens is to be used, which gives you the minimum astigmatism and the orientation of the lens. It also gives you a choice of 3 lenses, and Barrett himself has told me, don't go by the one they blindly claim you should use. Go with the one that leaves the patient plus 0.25 with the rule. So that's how you can do the IOL power calculation. And what I tend to do in my practice, I use the Barrett. I ask the company guys to use theirs, and generally there's almost similar. So it becomes like a double check. Now coming to the actual correction of astigmatism using toric IOLs. Now, when you use an instrument or a device to correct astigmatism, it works on the principle that when that device is viewed vectorially, it elicits a cylinder of the same power, but of the opposite axis. And that's how it works. Now, if you want a perfect alignment, we have to have a foolproof technique of axis marking. So this is a good way to mark the axis. I like to do the slit lamp technique of marking the axis, in which this is a Hack Street model of a slit lamp, which could be, sorry. Okay, we don't have video, just a minute. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just coming to the end of that, and so I'll just talk about it. So what you can do is axis marking on the slit lamp. You need the Hack Street model of the slit lamp. And on the slit lamp, because it's such a slit beam, you negate all the need of the blue dot, the thickness of the blue dot. You can even mark your incision site directly, because on the Hack Street slit lamp, you can actually end up marking it directly at the zero, at your axis of placement and your incision. You no longer need to do the 0, 180 and then place the lens. And finally, the 3 pointers in getting the alignment right. First, you've done the perfect marking. I like to do it with a hockey stick, which we've discussed several times in the past. And remember that you bisect your incisions. The second thing you need to do is you always end up removing all the viscoelastic, and the way I avoid removing viscoelastic is by just doing a hydroimplantation of the lens. So there's no viscoelastic at all. And finally, when you look at the alignment of both the lines on the cornea and the dots, even if they don't exactly match, as long as they are parallel to each other, because of the induced parallax, it signifies accuracy. Now that's how you get it right. You may have post-operative surprises. And if you do have post-operative surprises, it's very, very important to ensure first whether the patient is happy or no. Look at the spherical equivalent, and if it is close to 0 and the patient is happy, forget about it. And there are various ways in which you can go to astigmatismfix.com, Barrett treatment calculator, or we use an eye trace to rotate the lens. And every lens that is given you a significant refractive surprise cannot be sorted by rotating. All these devices tell you whether rotation will reduce the cylinder, or you have to have another option like laser vision correction, or an explantation of the lens, or an add-on lens. I guess this is a brief summary of how I think you can improve your outcomes using toric IOLs. Thank you, Santosh, for this.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Suvira, for an excellent talk. And we have a bit, Dr. Satyajit Sinha has some time constraints. So I request Dr. Satyajit Sinha to start his talk, and then we will have a discussion on this.
Sure.
And in fact, I have a talk on toric implants only. So my this thing you have done very simple. So I will give a very simple talk on toric implants. So over to you, Dr. Satyajit Sinha.
Oh, Shai, Vavi, good afternoon, Mehta sir. Suvir, I'm so happy that the presentation ran. Satyajit Bhaiya, hi. Kashyap
I
sir.
think Dr. Satyajit Sinha was there, but he is also there in some other session, is it? Dr. Sinha, please, can you start your presentation?
Good afternoon, Ragini.
Hi, Vavi. Hi, I said good afternoon.
Good afternoon, madam. Good afternoon.
Madam, kidhar se? I have to wish you, hi Darshana. I have to wish you first, you are still my senior, Vavya.
Happy Diwali to all of you. And to
Happy
you.
Diwali, yes. Happy
Happy
Diwali.
Satyajit is here. I think I just
He-
got a
he-
message.
He messaged me that
Yeah,
he has talked.
I
So
got a
please,
message from Kashyap sir that he did not get the link. I have
yes,
sent him
some
the link.
family emergency.
Yeah, and he didn't get the link also. I have tried to find out if he is going to be able to.
No, I think the entire family is in the hospital or something. Dr.
No,
Darshana.
mother-in-law.
Mother-in-law, huh? So for her only, everybody.
Yeah.
Mother-in-law is in ICU. He said that he is continuously with her and he won't be able to present the talk. I had talked with her his wife first.
Yes.
Dr. Sinha, you can start your presentation, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Satyajit Bhaiya.
Namaste, ma'am. How are you?
I'm good.
So at the onset, I would like to express my deep gratitude to Dr. Ragini Parekh ma'am for giving me this opportunity, and to the entire executive of Maharashtra Ophthalmic Society. Today, I will be speaking on anterior segment OCT use for diagnosis and management of anterior segment diseases. So OCT imaging of the anterior segment with longer wavelength of 1310 nanometers was developed later and had the advantages of better penetration through sclera. It was first described in early years, which had only 830 nanometer, and then slowly developed. A rapid non-contact method may be performed by a technician with patient sitting upright. It obtains high resolution cross section of the anterior segment without touching the eye. It enables visualization of form, site, and position of anterior chamber components, and it defines and measures the distance between them. Machine automatically eliminates the distortion induced by optical transmission factors. The advantages are it is non-contact, it's more physiological, it has shorter imaging time, there's less learning curve for the operator. The target may be used to induce accommodation in the eye imaged, and there is less inter-operator variability. Now, we are all aware of the corneal anatomy, and since this talk is more on the use of OCT for the anterior segment, so a little bit about the corneal anatomy. The basal epithelial cells, the limbal area, constitute the limbal stem cell, which amplify and proliferate into the corneal epithelium. Once the Bowman's is destroyed, it's unable to regenerate and therefore heals by scarring. Stroma constitute 90% of the total thickness. The Descemet membrane is very strong, and we can also see through this OCT sometimes descemetocele. Corneal decomposition occurs only after 75% of the endothelial cells are lost. These are some of the points that we have to keep in mind. In corneal diseases, with the help of OCT, we can predict the depth in keratectomy for removing the stromal haze in granular corneal we can identify when the DM is thickened in Fuchs dystrophy. We can see corneal infiltrates. We can also see use it in the diagnosis of keratoconus, hydrops, and anterior chamber inflammation in anterior uveitis with decreased corneal clarity. Now, this is a picture of the anterior chamber, which we see in low magnification when we are doing the OCT. This is in high magnification, and when we do the close-up, we can see the different layers of the cornea, which helps us in diagnosing different diseases. This is a picture of the acute hydrops, and you can actually see the thickness of the cornea in the different layers of the cornea using this anterior segment OCT, which helps in management. These are the different pictures of the acute hydrops which have been taken with the OCT. At times, the general view from the top in the
It's
cornea,
2:45.
when you are managing a depth of the corneal ulcer, at times the general view from the top does not give a good view as does the OCT image. So once you are treating, you can actually see how the depth of the corneal ulcer changes. Accordingly, the treatment of the ulcer can be changed and modified. We can also see impending corneal perforations, which is sometimes becomes very important. And we can also see the depth of the foreign bodies which are embedded in the cornea, which we can use in our day-to-day practice, which helps in better management. This is a picture of the keratoconus, which you can see the slit lamp picture. And while on OCT, you can see it like this, the anterior segment picture. You can also see the intracorneal rings, stromal rings. You can also see the pterygium, even while the management of pterygium excision also helps. You can see the depth to which the pterygium has gone. And this is the picture of the OCT image of the pterygium. You can actually see the remnants of the excised pterygium and the corneal stroma. In conjunctiva also, you can see the pterygium which extends over the conjunctiva. You can see pinguicula, lymphoma, and the melanoma. You can use the anterior segment OCT. In tumors, you can see the ocular surface common neoplasia, nodular degenerations. Though UBM is best, anterior segment OCT also helps in detection of iris tumors and ciliary tumors. Now, these are the different pictures of the subconjunctival tumors. You can see the the conjunctival epithelium and subconch tumor. This is very helpful now these days in dry eye disease. Anterior segment OCT helps in evaluation of the tear film meniscus after blocking the punctum. In biometry also, you can see the AC depth, the anterior chamber angle you can see with this OCT. You can measure white to white, and you can also see the lens thickness. This is a picture of the anterior chamber, which on anterior segment OCT, which gives you the depth. So as an overview and adjunct, it's an adjunct to gonioscopy as well as substitute when gonioscopy is not feasible, especially when you are seeing want to see the angles. It is useful as patient education tool, especially when laser peripheral iridotomy is being recommended. You can also do central corneal thickness, especially which is needed for LASIK. As we have discussed in keratoconus and intact for CCT, it also helps for phakic IOLs. Because the anatomy plays a large role in chronic angle closure, evaluating the angle anatomy is a critical first step in treating this disease. Using a combination of various anterior segment imaging technique, examiner will get a clear picture of the angle anatomy, and it helps make the appropriate treatment diseases. So here you can see the picture of the angle, which is very well seen by the OCT. This is a picture of the anterior synechius. This is a picture when you do a laser iridotomy. You can actually see whether you have whether it's patent or not. So, and in anterior segment surgery, it's useful in femtocataract surgery. Corneal incision integrity is seen with this anterior segment OCT. You can see DM detachment. You can see the location and stability of the IUL, and it's useful in DALC and DMEN. So post-cataract surgery, you can see the thickness of the cornea if the vision is not good. And sometimes you may also see there's a Descemet detachment, which you can see very clearly on the anterior segment OCT. So this is again picture of the Descemet detachment. These are different pictures which you can see when doing the anterior segment of the cornea, anterior segment OCT. Now you can also see the integrity of the wound that you make during cataract surgery. If you have any doubt, you can see it on the OCT of the 3-planar incision that is made. Now, for keratoprosthesis, everyone may not be having a topography machine. The anterior segment gives a fair idea of the central corneal thickness and other areas. If initial CCT on OCT is normal, then the patient can be referred for topography and then LASIK. Corneal status can also be evaluated in case of a repeat LASIK is being planned at a later date. IOL power calculation is an important challenge post-LASIK cases, and long-term follow-up may show ectasia post-LASIK, some of the things which we can see with the anterior segment OCT. Thank you so much for your patient hearing.
Thank you, sir, for an excellent talk on anterior segment OCT and its clinical use in day-to-day practice. Thanks a lot for joining in spite of your busy schedule. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Darshana,
Yes. Yes, sir.
now is the last talk by me.
Yes, yes.
Should I start
Last
sharing?
talk by our own chairman, Dr. Santosh Bhide, sir. Please.
Yeah. Actually, good afternoon, everybody. At the outset, I would like to thank Chairman Scientific Committee and scientific team for giving the opportunity. And Dr. Suvira has given an excellent talk on toric implants, so my job is easy. So I am going to share some of my thoughts on tips and tricks of toric implantation, no financial interest. There has been a lot of advances in cataract surgery in last 3 decades because of the availability of new instruments and lenses. And because of this, the mindset of patient has changed. And now patient wants to see better than what they used to see before development of cataract. Initially, they wanted to see better than what they had vision when they had cataract. So we have to perform really well. We all know that monofocal does not correct presbyopia and toric. And if you look at the prevalence of astigmatism in the population, almost 87% of the population has astigmatism. And if you look at the distribution of with the rule and against the rule astigmatism, at least 40% of the patients walking in for cataract surgery, we can include them for toric implants. We all know the problems because of uncorrected astigmatism. And there are various treatment options for treating the astigmatism, of which LRI and toric implants are good 2 options. Toric implants have quick recovery and they are stable. Long-term stability is also there, and toric implants can correct up to 12 diopters of cylinder with quick recovery and early rehabilitation of patient. So toric implant is the way to treat astigmatism. So let's come to tips of successful outcome. The first thing is that proper selection of patient is most important. Comprehensive ocular examination is a must. Accurate measurement of both anterior as well as posterior K readings. Proper selection of IOL power calculation and for use of formula. Then during surgery, proper axis marking and alignment intraoperatively. Cataract patients with regular corneal astigmatism of more than 0.75 diopters, we can take them for or think about doing toric implants. Capsular bag has to be intact. CCC has to be possible. One has to take proper history, whether they have done any corneal refractive surgery or watch for it. Patients with irregular astigmatism should be excluded. There are some relative or absolute contraindications for toric implants like corneal scars, keratoconus, Fuchs endothelial dystrophy, patients with ARMD, diabetes, glaucoma, uveitis, and amblyopia. For preoperative assessment, a comprehensive ocular examination is a must, and most important is assessment of ocular surface and tear film status. We as a cataract surgeon often overlook at this important aspect of the eye, and we do not assess ocular surface or tear film, but we must do a thorough checkup whenever we are using any premium implant. Check for the grade and type of cataract so that we can plan the surgery accordingly. Rule out any associated ocular comorbidities. Check for zonular integrity and integrity of posterior capsule preoperatively. Another important point is watch for proper mydriasis. During examination, we come to know that particular pupil is not dilating in a patient. Then one has to be very cautious and we have to plan surgery accordingly. Another is that proper history taking, whether the patient has benign enlargement of prostate and whether that patient is on any medication like tamsulosin. Then one has to be very careful and we can have a potential case of floppy iris syndrome, intraoperative floppy iris syndrome, and we can prepare accordingly if we are planning for toric implants. Another important point is proper counseling of the patient. Measurement of K reading, Dr. Suvira has explained excellently about K readings. but one has to measure anterior as well as posterior curvature for proper IOL calculation. Few words about posterior curvature of the cornea. It acts as a minus lens, and astigmatism is against the rule, which usually remains stable throughout the life, as opposed to anterior corneal curvature, which keeps on changing with age. There are various instruments by which we can measure K reading, commonly available for everybody, are like manual keratometer, which is based on doubling principle, but this does not assess posterior corneal curvature. We have Auto-K, IOL Master 700. Dr. Suvira has explained that it doesn't measure it actually, but it gives us the prediction of posterior corneal curvature. LensStar with its technology does check the posterior corneal curvature. Topo analyzers, which basic topo analyzers, we use Placido disc principle. They do not assess posterior corneal curvature, but they definitely help in ruling out any subtle ectasias or scars or ocular surface disorders or dry eye. There are some advanced equipments like OrbScan, Pentacam, Galilei, iTrace, and Aura. So as Dr. Suvira has told us, and that at least 2 or 3 instruments you should take reading, and the reading has to be consistent for IOL power calculation. Few words about posterior corneal astigmatism. Professor Douglas Koch had studied in Houston, Texas, about 700 eyes of 435 individuals, and then he developed a nomogram. So by not measuring posterior corneal astigmatism, you can overcorrect with the rule astigmatism by the factor of 1.38 or undercorrect against the rule astigmatism by the factor of 0.65. So he has developed a nomogram, and which can be used for IOL power calculation. Which formula is to be used for IOL power calculation is the most important question. Any formula which takes into account your surgically induced astigmatism, posterior corneal curvature, that is the and effective lens position is the formula which one must use. Now, how to calculate surgically induced astigmatism? You can calculate on your own by going to the site of Warren Hill. There are many toric calculators are available, but Barrett toric calculator is the best. Or you can use 2 different formulas and then come to the conclusion. Marking is again an important step. You can do manual marking. Most of us can do manual marking, and there is a 3-step technique: preoperative reference, intraoperative, and intraoperative alignment. Or there are some advanced technologies like Callisto Eye or Varion, which can be used. So to summarize, for proper outcome in toric implants, there are various factors which influence the outcome. Preoperative case selection, investigation, and intraoperative proper alignment with proper postoperative care plays very important role in good surgical outcome. Evaluation of posterior corneal curvature is a must. Image-guided making and intraoperative aberrometer has increased precision, and it has assisted in planning the incision, capsular axis, as well as alignment of the IOL. Marking of the axis, some of the basic tips I'm going to share. Marking of the axis should be done in sitting position so as to avoid errors due to cyclotorsion. And believe me, the cyclotorsion can be as high as 27 degrees. Eye should be dry before marking so that there is no smudging of the ink. But it's better not to use ink. And as Dr. Suvira has said, you can use a hockey stick and just make an impression on the corneal epithelium, which lasts throughout the surgery. Precise central capsular axis is essential for better outcome. Few words about OVD removal. If you are comfortable by a hydro injection of the IOL, go ahead with it. But if you are not, and if you have used a OVD, then rotate IOL just short of your intended axis. Remove OVD entirely from below the IOL also, from the bag also. And once you have removed entire OVD, then you can properly align. And the basic and most important thing is that preoperative counseling is the most important factor for successful outcome. Thank you once again. Thanks for the opportunity.
Very well summarized.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Dr. Suvira, would you like to add something? And Dr. Chandrasekhar Vavikar also, if you can add
So,
on, it's very important.
I'd just like to add one point because I don't think we have much point. Sometimes in patients with peripheral corneal scars, yeah, or in a patient with a stable keratoconus, I would still consider a toric IOL. Suppose you've got a patient who's had keratoconus years ago, it's stable, you've monitored that it is stable. In those cases, I think you might have a better quality of vision if you correct the refractive cylinder. So also with corneal scars, I'm not saying there'll be bang on vision, but if you've got a stable irregular surface, you're still okay to perform. It might give you a little bit more. At least I tend to. And I've largely been happy with that. Just sharing my experiences.
There are some newer lenses which help in correcting such, especially corneal scars and all, where you don't need to rotate the lens. Like certain companies have come up with the newer smart IOL technology. So you can use those lenses.
And also if you, some of these patients like scars and all, they have a very high cylinder. Yes. It's very possible to just customize the IOL now from 12, yes. 15, 28.
Yes.
I've operated 16 to 20 diapers as well.
Yes, customized IOL. Dr. Vavikar?
She has put a point very well that whenever there is corneal scar or stable keratoconus, we can certainly put toric IOL. But the objective is not to get rid of the astigmatism. The objective should be debulking the astigmatism. Yeah. And as far as the marking is concerned, many times I use Virion, but once in a while when Virion is not available, once I have marked on slit lamp, I have made a habit of measuring the axis of that mark. Many times we realize that it is off center by 2 degrees, either this side or that side, and that definitely improves the placement of our toric lens.
So accordingly, you change the axis of implantation.
Suppose, like let's say like 6 o'clock I mark, but you know patient moves, and instead of 6 o'clock you are slightly on the right side, on the left side, like 5:30 or 6:30. Yeah. When you measure it second time, you realize the mistake, and then you take corrective measurements accordingly, corrective steps accordingly.
Correct. So you can minimize errors still by doing that.
Almost. I think it's very important to be very careful that when we are marking, whether it's a freehand marking or a slit lamp marking or any marking, if we get into the habit to make sure that the patient's chin, head, face is absolutely straight, there are no tilts, there are no turns, then you can come close to being as close to, being bang on. There's so many things that and that we got to make a habit out of them, I think.
And quick word about the incision, surgeon's incision, whether you take it on steep axis or you stick to your own incision by both the experts, Dr. Vavikar as well as Dr. Suvira.
I just take the axis I'm comfortable with because I've done a lot of research on my own on axis incisions and I got very variable results. So I let the toric lens take care of the cylinder and I just take care of the incision where I want to sit. Okay. Because because we will operate best when we are operating at an incision we are comfortable with, however senior we may be, I think.
Perfect. Even I have the same opinion. And a quick word on your thing that the axis blade half here and half there. You can say, Dr. Suvira or Dr. Vavikar, you can give your opinion about incision on steep axis.
See, now we know very well that previously used to think that if we take an incision at 180, that means temporal incision, right eye, the astigmatism induced will be at 180. But we realized that that is not the case. So taking the incision on steep axis is not a favored practice anymore. And therefore it is better that you be on the axis with which you are really comfortable. That's exactly what Dr. Suvira also said.
Thank you. So I think we have just overshot by 4 minutes. Sorry for that, for the next session. Thank you, Dr. Darshana. You want to sum up the session, Dr. Darshana?
Thank you so much, Ragini ma'am, all the speakers, co-chairman, Dr. Bhide sir, and for this lovely talk on SICS and especially on the toric lenses. Ma'am, will you like to speak something?
Yes.
Ragini ma'am?
Ragini madam.
So thank you everybody. Thank you so much, Santosh. Thank you, Vavi. Thank you everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.